This is a review of elements of a house that could present issues. And really, as I go through this, one important note I want to make that, by the way, would make an excellent test question. What is your responsibility as an agent in all of this? And it is your responsibility to be aware of these hazardous issues, to possibly look for signs of these issues. But most importantly, you should never confirm or deny the presence of a hazardous substance without it being professionally tested. Radon, for example, is an odorless, colorless gas. You're not going to just walk into a property and your trick knee that you hurt in high school football go out and think, oh, it's going to rain and there's radon in this house. Ladies, your hair doesn't go flat and you think, radon, right? It's got to be tested by a professional. So while you got to be aware of issues and you need to be able to look for some general signs, you should not confirm or deny without having it actually tested. Mold is another one. I've seen black, gooky, gross stuff in kitchens before. And someone's thought, mold, we're going to get spurs in our lungs and die, right? And in reality, it was just crusted over spaghetti sauce. The kitchen was just dirty. It didn't test for any presence of mold. And by the way, there's many different types of mold of many different variations causing various different types of harm. So again, have things tested by a professional. That's what that home inspection period is for. The first substance that we're going to talk about is asbestos. And asbestos originally was put in a lot of building materials because it was thought to be fire resistant. It was in ceiling tiles, floor tiles, a lot of different insulations had it. And then all of a sudden they figured out over time, it would be in place, but if you disturbed it in any way, it would crumble and disintegrate almost into a powder. And by inhaling that powder, it could cause lung damage. So in order for it to really be disposed of properly, they do a process of encapsulation so that those fine little fibers don't get into the air for you to breathe in. Radon, this is going to be a very common one. Asbestos, going back to that, they stopped using that product in 1978. Radon is a very common test that you will have done. Again, it's an odorless, colorless gas. It is known to be the #2 cause of lung cancer. Not a lot of people talk about that because smoking has such a big presence in that area. They do mitigate with their measurement system that any reading over 4.0 be mitigated. And from my experience, mitigating a radon system is probably going to be anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000. I know that's a big range, but depending on where they need to put the system, where a sump pump is located, and some other conditions, the size of the home, that could affect it. Radon, when I first got in the business in 2002, no one was testing for radon. And then when people kind of started testing maybe around 2004 or 5, those radon systems were about $1,800. There was maybe one provider in our area. So as we in central Iowa have more people that are willing to mitigate through this process, that price has come down. And now I've had radon systems put in for around $1,000. I know a lot of builders now are putting in the plumbing for it, but you got to connect the fan that actually mitigates it and pulls the gas out. You got to do that part of the system, but at least the plumbing's there, which does save some money. A radon test for your career, if you've got a client that wants to test for it during an inspection period, it does take 48 hours to do. So you want to plan ahead so that that gets done within the time frame of your inspection period. It doesn't lapse, over the deadline. You can do radon tests that you mail in. Those are pretty inexpensive. You can buy a kit at Lowe's, but they take several weeks to return and obviously wouldn't fit in the time frame per our inspection periods on our contracts. Carbon monoxide happens a lot with generators, furnaces, or even space heaters. It's a dangerous gas that gets put off as a byproduct of burning fuel. Again, it's odorless, colorless, and it's one of those that if you wake up and you feel a little kooky, you better just get out of the house. It happens very quickly that gas can really gas people and cause asphyxiation very, very quickly. We talked a little bit about mold already. Safe Drinking Water Act. This really is centered around laws that protect our groundwater. And things that protect our groundwater would be burial sites. We obviously contain burials. They're not going directly into the ground, so that decay isn't contaminating our groundwater. Sorry, I started with that one. Any hazardous waste that you would maybe pour as a byproduct. Those chemicals obviously can really play an impact on our drinking water. Pesticides sometimes in Iowa, I know, are a big one. Another one that's very common is underground storage tanks, like at a gas station or a septic system that's underground. We want to contain those things so that we've got clean drinking water. That is what keeps us healthy. And back before we had sewer lines and we had something in place, back in the days, you used to dump your feces just into the river. And then that's also where you went to get drinking water. Gross. I hope you're not on your way to lunch. But that is how these things used to happen. And that's where you saw massive deaths, like in England back in the day, in the 1400s and 1500s, is because they didn't understand the concept of safe and clean drinking water. We're going to talk more about groundwater hazard and safety when we get to the state portion with the Iowa content. So stay tuned. I know you're excited to hear more about it. Lead-based paint is another big rock for your career. Lead-based paint happened where back in the day, they used to put lead in paint. I believe it was a way to help the paint dry and hold a really good pigment to it. It was used prior to 1978, and that's a magical date that you need to know for the exam, is prior to 1978. And what happened was this paint, as it chipped and peeled, kids ate it and it tastes sweet. Or maybe on the exterior, when it rained, that paint would run on the exterior of the house and then again contaminate groundwater. And they were finding that it was creating developmental issues in young children. If you remember the movie Tommy Boy with Chris Farley, there's a scene where he's with Rob Lowe, his new stepbrother, and they've gone cow tipping, and Tommy Boy is covered in cow manure. And Rob Lowe's stepbrother role is hosing him off at a gas station, and Tommy Boy is singing "I'm a Maniac" from the movie Flashdance. And Rob Lowe's character says, "Did you eat a lot of paint chips as a child?" If you remember that movie and you remember that part of it, that's actually a lead-based paint joke. That's actually a throw at lead-based paint, okay? Another thing I want you to know about lead-based paint, I want you to know 1978, but any property built prior to 1978, this is the federal disclosure that I was leaning towards in the last video. This is a federal disclosure that says any property built prior to 1978 must have this lead-based paint disclosure filled out. Now, it does not have the exemptions that I gave to you earlier about the seller's property disclosure about its condition. There's very few exemptions of this disclosure. especially in retail sales, or sorry, in residential sales. The seller fills this out and acknowledges if they know of lead-based paint or not, and if they've got a copy of a report where that's located. And then the purchaser has the ability to do a 10-day inspection. Personally, in my career, I've not had anyone ever test for lead-based paint. I've only had one seller that did it after they purchased the property. And they did it, I believe, for a project while they were in medical school at DMU or something. And then, of course, had to mitigate and solve the issue of their findings. But this is a requirement. Again, properties built prior to 1978, and the law says that this must be filled out prior to a buyer writing an offer or a seller accepting it. Prior to a buyer writing an offer or a seller accepting it. That means that if we sell a house today, let's say it's June 15th, and we forget to get this signed, and then our clients sign it on June 20th, we are in violation, and there's big fines attached to this. The last time I researched it, it was an $11,000 fine for each missed signature for both the brokers and the agents. It can be very expensive. So make sure that you're mindful of this one. But I think that's one you'll for sure hopefully have on the exam, because I know you'll remember the year 1978. It's one that you'll need for your career. That's very important.